The sky burned orange when the first ships appeared. Sergeant Kongtae watched them through his binoculars from the mountain ridge, counting the dark shapes that blocked out the stars. 20, 30, 50 warships. His stomach turned cold. Sergeant Corporal Yuna said from behind him. Her voice was steady, but he could hear the fear underneath. I cannot reach command. They are jamming all signals. Kong lowered the binoculars. Below them, the colony of New Busan stretched across the valley. 200,000 people lived there. Farmers, engineers, families, children, and now alien warships hung above them like hungry birds waiting for prey. How many soldiers do we have? Kong asked, though he already knew the answer. 12, sir, including you and me. 12 soldiers. A reconnaissance unit sent to survey the northern mountains for mineral deposits. They carried light weapons, basic supplies, and communication equipment. They were not meant for war. They were meant to walk, observe, report, but war had found them anyway. Private Han Dae ran up the slope, his young face red from effort. At 22, he was the youngest in the unit. He was also their explosives expert, a job he had chosen because he thought it sounded exciting. Now, watching the alien fleet, he did not look excited. He looked like a boy who had just realized the world was much darker than he had imagined. The landing ships are coming down, Han Dae reported, breathing hard. Hundreds of them. Maybe thousands. Kong turned to look at the rest of his squad. 10 soldiers stood in a loose circle among the rocks and trees. Their faces showed different things. Fear, confusion, anger, but none of them ran. None of them suggested running. He felt a small spark of pride in his chest. Listen to me, Kong said, his voice cutting through the cold mountain air. The Helix Dominion has invaded our colony. We do not know how many soldiers they have, but it is a lot more than 12. Our communications are blocked. We cannot call for help. We cannot warn Earth. He paused, letting the words settle. We have 2 choices. We can hide in these mountains and wait. Maybe the aliens will leave. Maybe help will come. Or maybe everyone in that city will die while we watch. Private Bora stepped forward. She was the unit's medic, a woman in her 30s who had once been a doctor in a civilian hospital. She had joined the military after her husband and daughter died in a pirate raid 3 years ago. She rarely smiled, but she never complained, and she never hesitated when someone needed help. What is the second choice? Bora asked. Kong looked at her, then at all of them. We fight. We use what we know. We use these mountains. We make the enemy bleed for every step they take on our world. Silence followed. The wind moved through the trees, carrying the distant sound of engines from the valley below. 12 against an army, Han Dae said quietly. That is not a fight. That is suicide, maybe Kong admitted. But every soldier we kill is one less soldier hurting our people. Every hour we slow them down is one more hour for Earth to notice something is wrong. Every moment we refuse to surrender sends a message. What message? Yuna asked. Kong's eyes hardened. That humans do not break easily. The alien landing ships touched down around the capital city just before sunset. From the mountain ridge, the squad watched through their scopes as thousands of Helix soldiers poured out like insects from a broken nest. They were tall creatures, covered in dark armor that looked like the shell of a beetle. They moved in perfect formation, disciplined and confident. Why would they not be confident? They had conquered 37 worlds before this one. Lord Vorn stood on the deck of his command ship, watching the invasion through a holographic display. He was pleased. The human settlement had no military ships in orbit, no defense platforms, no army visible on the ground. Just civilians running and screaming as his soldiers surrounded them. This world will fall within 3 days, his second officer said. One day, Vorn corrected. These creatures are weak. They build cities, but not fortresses. They grow food, but not armies. They are not warriors. They are prey. Communications officer approached. My lord, we are detecting a small energy signature in the northern mountains. Possibly a human unit. Vorn waved his hand dismissively. Send a patrol to investigate. 100 soldiers should be enough. If they find anything, crush it. On the mountain, Kong gathered his squad for a final briefing. They had moved to a hidden position deeper in the forest, where the trees were thick enough to hide them from aerial surveillance. "Here's the plan," he said, drawing lines in the dirt with a stick. "We do not fight them directly. We are not strong enough for that. Instead, we become ghosts. We strike and disappear. We destroy their supplies. We kill their scouts. We make them afraid of the dark." He looked at Yuna. "Can you access their communications?" She nodded slowly. "I can try. Their encryption is advanced, but I have some tricks." "Good. I want you listening to everything they say. I want to know where they are going before they know." He turned to Hyundai. "You brought explosives?" The young man managed a small grin, enough to make some noise. "Then start planning. Every road, every bridge, every supply route. I want them to feel like the ground itself is fighting them." Finally, he looked at Bora. "The civilians will need help. People will be hurt, scared, hiding. I need you to find them. Build a network. Anyone who can fight, anyone who can carry messages, anyone who can hide supplies. We cannot win this war alone." Bora's eyes were cold and determined. "I understand." That night, the first Helix patrol entered the northern mountains. 100 soldiers, armed with plasma rifles and scanning equipment. They were veterans of a dozen campaigns. They expected to find nothing but rocks and trees. They found Kong Tae instead. The first explosion came without warning, collapsing a cliff face onto the lead vehicles. The second explosion blocked their retreat, and then the shooting started, muzzle flashes appearing from a dozen different positions in the darkness. The Helix soldiers fired back, but they could not see their enemy. They could only hear the screams of their companions falling one by one. 30 minutes later, it was over. 73 Helix soldiers lay dead. The remaining 27 fled back toward the city, their confidence shattered. On his command ship, Lord Vorn received the report with disbelief. 73 dead? From a survey patrol? Yes, my lord. The survivors report. They say it was like fighting shadows. The humans appeared from nowhere and vanished the same way. Vorn's mandibles clicked with anger. How many humans attacked them? The officer hesitated. Unknown, my lord. The survivors' estimate. At least 200, Vorn nodded grimly. 200 human soldiers? More than he expected, but nothing his army could not handle. He would send a larger force tomorrow. 1,000 soldiers. He would crush these humans and hang their bodies from the city walls, in the mountains. Kong Tae sat with his back against a rock, reloading his rifle. Around him, his 11 soldiers rested, some of them still shaking from the adrenaline. They had won the first battle. But the war had just begun. He looked up at the stars, wondering if anyone on Earth knew what was happening. Then he closed his eyes and let himself rest. Tomorrow, they would hunt again. 5 days passed, and the mountains became a graveyard for the Helix Dominion. Lord Vorn had sent 1,000 soldiers after the first disaster. They marched into the forest with heavy weapons and armored vehicles, ready to destroy the human resistance. They found nothing. No camps, no footprints, no signs of life. Then, on the third night, the killing began again. Explosions tore through their supply trucks. Snipers picked off officers from impossible distances. Soldiers who wandered too far from the main group simply vanished. Their bodies found days later hanging from trees with strange messages carved into their armor. By the 5th day, only 400 of the 1,000 remained. They retreated to the city in shame and terror. Kong Tae watched them go from a hidden position on a cliff. Beside him, Hyundai was cleaning his rifle, his hands steady, despite the exhaustion in his eyes. "And I scared," Hyundai said. "I saw them running. Actual running. These aliens who conquered 37 worlds running from us." Kong did not smile. "Fear is a weapon. We use it because we have nothing else. But do not mistake their fear for weakness. They will come back. More of them. With bigger guns." On the other side of the ridge, Yuna sat with her communication equipment spread around her like pieces of a puzzle. She had spent 3 sleepless nights breaking into the Helix communication network. And now she could hear everything they said. Every order, every report, every frightened whisper between soldiers. "They think we are 200, she said, looking up at Kang with tired eyes. "Maybe 300. Their officers are arguing about how many troops to send next." "Good, let them argue. Let them waste time. There is something else." Yuna's voice grew serious. "They are calling us ghosts. Death spirits. Some of their soldiers are refusing to patrol at night. Their commander is very angry." Kang nodded slowly. This was working. Fear was spreading through the enemy ranks like a disease. But he knew it could not last forever. Eventually, the Helix would realize they were fighting only 12 humans, and then the real battle would begin. In the valley below, Bora moved through the shadows of the occupied city. She had entered through an old drainage tunnel 3 nights ago, carrying medical supplies in a worn backpack. The city was a nightmare now. Helix soldiers patrolled every street. Civilians were forced to stay indoors, their homes searched randomly for weapons or communication devices. Those who resisted were killed publicly as examples. But Bora found something the aliens did not expect. The people of New Busan were not broken. They were angry. She met them in basements and abandoned buildings. Factory workers, farmers, teachers, shopkeepers, old men who had fought in wars 50 years ago. Young women who had never held a gun but wanted to learn. They came to her in small groups asking the same question. How can we help? Bora taught them what she knew. How to bandage wounds. How to move without being seen. How to pass messages without speaking. She organized them into cells, small groups of 3 or 4 who knew only each other. If one was caught, they could not betray the rest. And slowly, the resistance grew. Supply depots caught fire in the middle of the night. Alien vehicles developed strange problems with their engines. Soldiers found their food contaminated, their water poisoned. Nothing big enough to stop the occupation, but enough to hurt it. Enough to remind the Helix that they were not welcome. On the 7th day, Lord Vorn received a disturbing report. "The humans in the mountains have destroyed another convoy," his intelligence officer said. 40 soldiers dead. All supplies lost. Vorn slammed his fist against the table. "How? We sent escorts. We sent scouts. How do they keep finding us?" "We believe they have access to our communications, my lord." Warren stared at him. "Impossible. Our encryption is unbreakable. Apparently not to humans." The commander stood and walked to the window of his command center. Below, the captured city spread out like a map. His city now. His conquest. But it did not feel like victory. It felt like standing in a trap, waiting for the jaws to close. "How many soldiers do we have on this world?" he asked. 40,000 ground troops, my lord, plus support personnel. "And how many humans are fighting us?" The officer hesitated. "Our estimates range from 200 to 500, based on the scale of their attacks. 500 humans. Against 40,000 Helix warriors. It should have been laughable. But Vorn was not laughing. "Send 5,000 soldiers into the mountains," he ordered. "I want those humans found and destroyed. No more patrols. No more convoys. A full military operation. Hunt them down." The officer bowed and left. Vorn remained at the window, watching the distant mountains with growing hatred. Somewhere up there, humans were laughing at him, making a fool of him. He would find them. He would kill them all. And he would burn those mountains to ashdot in a cave deep in the forest. Kang gathered his squad for a meeting. They looked different, now than they had a week ago. Harder, thinner. Their uniforms were torn and dirty. Their faces covered with scratches and bruises. 2 of them carried wounds that had not fully healed. But their eyes were sharp, and their weapons were clean. "We have done well," Kang said, his voice echoing softly off the stone walls. "In 7 days, we have killed over 600 enemy soldiers. We have destroyed their supplies. We have made them afraid." He paused, letting them feel the weight of what they had accomplished. "But it is not enough. They are sending a larger force. 5,000 soldiers. They will sweep these mountains from end to end, looking for us. Private Hyundai leaned forward. Can we fight 5,000? Not directly. But we can keep moving. Keep hitting them. Make them chase shadows while we bleed them one cut at a time. Kong looked at each of them in turn. This will be harder than anything we have done. Some of us may not survive. If anyone wants to leave, to hide and wait for rescue, I will not stop you. There is no shame in wanting to live. No one moved. No one spoke. The silence was their answer. Finally, Bora broke it. I found something in the city. The aliens are holding prisoners. 3 civilians. They plan to execute them publicly tomorrow unless the human army surrenders. The human army, Hyundai muttered. They still think we are an army. They are going to kill innocent people, Bora continued, her voice tight with anger. Children will watch their parents die because of us. Because we made the enemy angry. Kong felt the weight of her words. Every action had consequences. Every victory had a price. He had known this from the beginning, but knowing and feeling were different things. We cannot save them, Yuna said quietly. The city is heavily guarded. We would be killed before we reach them, maybe Kang said slowly. A dangerous thought was forming in his mind. Or maybe we give the enemy what they want. The squad looked at him in confusion. They want to see the human army. So we show them an army. He turned to Hyundai. How many explosives do we have left? Enough. Why? Kang allowed himself a small, grim smile. Because tomorrow night, 12 soldiers are going to attack an occupied city, and we are going to win. The squad exchanged glances. Fear, excitement, determination. They were about to do something impossible. Something insane. Something that would either save lives or end theirs. But that was what humans did. They fought when fighting made no sense. They hoped when hope was gone. They refused to surrender, even when surrender was the only logical choice. And sometimes, against all odds, they won. The plan was simple. Simple plans were the best because they had fewer things that could go wrong. But simple did not mean safe. And Kang knew that several of his soldiers might die before the sun rose again. They spent the day preparing. Hyundai buried explosives at 12 different locations around the city's outer edges. Yuna mapped every patrol route, every guard station, every blind spot in the enemy's defenses. Bora contacted her resistance network inside the city. Passing along instructions through a chain of whispered messages by nightfall, everything was ready. The 3 prisoners were being held in the central plaza, tied to metal posts under bright lights. 2 men and 1 woman, chosen randomly from the civilian population. Their crime was simply existing. Their punishment was meant to break the spirit of the human resistance. It would not work. Not tonight. At midnight. The first explosion shattered the silence. A warehouse on the eastern edge of the city erupted in flames, sending a pillar of fire into the dark sky. Helix soldiers rushed toward it, shouting orders in their clicking language. Before they arrived, a second explosion hit the western district. Then a third in the south. Then a fourth. Lord Vorn watched the chaos from his command center, his mandibles clicking with fury. What is happening? Report. Multiple attacks, my lord. All around the city perimeter. We are detecting weapons fire in at least 7 locations. How many humans? Unknown. But the attacks are coordinated. This must be their main force. Vorn made his decision instantly. Pull soldiers from the interior. Send them to reinforce the perimeter. Crush this attack before it spreads. It was exactly what Kong had hoped for, as thousands of Helix soldiers rushed toward the outer edges of the city. Center became thin. Guard stations emptied. Patrol routes broke apart. And through the gaps, 12 shadows moved like water flowing through cracks in a wall. Kong led the way. His rifle pressed against his shoulder, his eyes scanning every corner. Behind him came his squad, moving in pairs, covering each other's movements. They wore dark clothing and carried silenced weapons. In the chaos of explosions and distant gunfire, no one noticed them. The plaza was still guarded, but not by many. 20 soldiers stood around the prisoners, looking nervous as fires burned on the horizon. They did not see the shadows approaching from 3 directions. Kong held up his fist. Everyone stopped. He pointed at Yuna and Hyundai, then gestured toward the left flank. They nodded and vanished into the darkness. He pointed at Bora and 2 others, sending them right. The remaining soldiers stayed with him in the center. He counted silently in his head. 3, 2, 1. The attack lasted 11 seconds. Silenced rifles coughed from 3 directions. Guards fell before they could raise their weapons. One managed to shout a warning, but a bullet ended his cry before it could leave his throat. When the last body hit the ground, Kong was already running toward the prisoners. "Do not speak," he whispered as he cut their ropes. "Do not scream. Follow us and stay quiet." The woman stared at him with wide, disbelieving eyes. "Who are you?" "Friends. Now move." Bora took the lead, guiding the prisoners toward a drainage tunnel she had discovered during her nights in the city. The squad formed a protective circle around them, weapons ready, eyes watching every shadow. They were halfway to safety when everything went wrong. A Helix patrol appeared around a corner. 6 soldiers returning from the perimeter. For a frozen moment, both groups stared at each other in surprise. Then the shooting started. Hyundai reacted first, throwing himself in front of the prisoners and opening fire. 2 aliens fell. Kong dropped a 3rd. But the remaining 3 were faster than humans, and their plasma rifles lit up the darkness with deadly light. Private June, a quiet man who had barely spoken 10 words in the past week, was hit in the chest. He fell without a sound, his eyes already empty. Private Myra, a young woman with a talent for languages, took a shot to the leg and collapsed against a wall, still firing her weapon. Yuna finished the last alien with a single shot to the head. Then silence returned, broken only by Mira's pained breathing. Bora rushed to her side. Medical kit already open. "The wound is bad. She cannot walk." "Then we carry her," Kong said. "Hyundai, take her. Everyone else, keep moving." Hyundai lifted Myra over his shoulder like she weighed nothing. The young man was stronger than he looked, and right now, that strength meant life or death. They moved faster now, abandoning stealth for speed. Somewhere behind them, alarms were finally beginning to sound. They reached the drainage tunnel as spotlights began sweeping the streets. One by one, they dropped into the darkness below, splashing through shallow water that smelled of rust and age. Bora guided them through the maze of pipes and tunnels, her memory perfect despite the chaos. When they finally emerged outside the city walls, the eastern sky was beginning to lighten. They had made it. Against all logic, against all odds. They had walked into an occupied city and walked out with 3 prisoners and only 1 dead. But Kang felt no triumph, only exhaustion and grief. They buried June at dawn in a small clearing surrounded by pine trees. There was no time for proper words, no energy for ceremony. Kong simply placed a stone over the grave and promised silently that he would remember. Mira survived, thanks to Bora's skill, but she could not fight anymore. They left her with the resistance network in the city, hidden in a basement where sympathetic civilians would care for her. That left 10 soldiers. 10 humans against 40,000 aliens. The news of the rescue spread quickly. Helix soldiers whispered about it in fear. Civilian prisoners had been stolen from under their noses. Guards killed without warning, and the human army had vanished like smoke. Lord Vorn raged and threatened, but his anger only made things worse. His soldiers were not just scared now. They were beginning to doubt. On the 11th day, Yuna intercepted a message that changed everything. "Reinforcements," she said, her face pale. "The Helix are calling for another fleet. 50 more warships. 100,000 additional soldiers." The squad sat in their hidden cave, processing this news. 100,000. Even with all their tricks, all their courage, they could not fight that many. "How long?" Kong asked. 3 days. Maybe 4. Kong closed his eyes. They had survived 11 days. They had killed hundreds of enemies. They had become legends whispered in fear by an alien army. But it was not enough. It would never be enough. "There's one more thing," Una said quietly. "Our emergency beacon. It has been broadcasting since the first day. I do not know if anyone has received it. I do not know if help is coming. But if it is, they need to come soon." Hope, such a fragile, dangerous thing. Kang had tried not to feel it, tried not to let himself imagine rescue that might never arrive. But sitting in that cave, surrounded by the bravest soldiers he had ever known, he allowed himself one small moment of belief. Maybe help was coming. Maybe Earth had heard their call. Maybe they just had to hold on a little longer, or maybe they would die here, in these mountains, fighting until the last bullet was spent. Either way, they would not surrender. They would not run. They would stand and fight and make the enemy pay for every breath of air on this human world. "Get some rest," Kong told his squad. "Tomorrow, we hunt again." They slept with weapons in their hands. Dreaming of home, on the 12th day, the Helix Dominion stopped playing games. Lord Vorn committed 15,000 soldiers to the mountain sweep. Not patrols. Not hunting parties. An army moving through the forest like a slow wave, burning everything in its path. Trees fell. Animals fled. The sky filled with smoke, and the sound of alien war machines talk watched from a ridge as the enemy advanced. Beside him, what remained of his squad lay hidden among the rocks, their faces grim. "We cannot stop that," Hyundai said, stating the obvious. "No," Kong agreed, "but we can slow it. We can hurt it. And we can lead it away from the civilians hiding in the valleys." That was what they did. For 2 days, they ran and fought. Ran and fought. They led the enemy through narrow passes where explosives brought down avalanches. They lured patrols into swamps where heavy vehicles sank and soldiers drowned. They set fires that spread through the dry underbrush, forcing the alien advance to stop and wait. But the Helix kept coming. Always more. Always closer. On the night of the 13th day, they lost 2 more soldiers. Private Soon was killed by a sniper while covering the squad's retreat. He died before he hit the ground, a small mercy. Private Quan survived longer, hit in the stomach during an ambush. Bora fought for 2 hours to save him, but the wound was too deep, the damage too severe. He died holding her hand, whispering the name of someone far away. 8 soldiers remained. 8 humans against an empire. Kong gathered them in a shallow cave as rain began to fall outside. They were exhausted beyond words. Their ammunition was running low. Their bodies were covered in cuts and bruises that had no time to heal, but their eyes still burned with something that could not be measured or killed. "I will not lie to you," Kong said. "We are running out of options. The enemy is closing in. Our supplies are almost gone. Help may come, or it may not." He paused, looking at each face in turn. Yuna, her fingers still moving across her communication equipment even as she listened. Han Dae-young, and scared but refusing to show it. Bora, whose hands had saved so many lives and taken more than she could count. "I am proud of you," Kong continued, his voice rough. "Every single one of you. Whatever happens next, remember that. We held. Against everything they threw at us, we held." "We are not dead yet," Hyundai said with a weak smile. "Do not give the funeral speech too early." Small laugh passed through the group. Even now, even here, they could still find something to hold on to. Yuna suddenly held up her hand for silence. Her face changed, shifting from exhaustion to disbelief. Wait. I am receiving something. Helix communications," Kong asked. "No." Her voice trembled. "Human frequencies. Military codes. It is the Third Fleet." The words hung in the air like a dream, afraid to be real. "Are you certain?" Bora whispered. Why UNA was crying now, tears cutting lines through the dirt on her face. 200 warships. 500,000 soldiers. They received our beacon. They are coming. Kong felt something break inside his chest. Relief. Hope. Joy so sharp it hurt. He had not let himself believe it would happen. He had been prepared to die in these mountains, fighting until his last breath. But now, suddenly, impossibly, there was a chance. "How long until they arrive?" he asked. Yuna's expression darkened. 16 hours. They are pushing their engines to maximum, but 16 hours is the best they can do. 16 hours? In eternity, when 15,000 enemies were closing in from all sides? Can you contact them? Send them our position? Yuna nodded and began working. Her fingers danced across the controls, building a connection across the vast darkness of space. Minutes passed. Then a voice crackled through the speaker, distant but clear. "Reconnaissance Unit 7. This is Admiral Park of the 3rd Expeditionary Fleet. We have received your beacon and your transmission. Hold your position. We are coming." Took the communicator. "Admiral, this is Sergeant Kung Tae. We have been engaging the enemy for 13 days. Current strength is 8 soldiers. The enemy has 40,000 ground troops with reinforcements incoming. We will hold as long as we can, but you need to hurry." There was a pause. When the Admiral spoke again, his voice was different. Softer, almost awed. 8 soldiers? You have been fighting an entire invasion force with 8 soldiers? 12 at the start, sir? We lost 4. Another pause. Then, Sergeant, your country and your species owe you a debt that can never be repaid. Hold on. We are coming at maximum speed. The galaxy will know what you have done. The connection ended. Kong set down the communicator and looked at his squad. They were smiling now, crying and smiling at the same time. Even Bora, who rarely showed emotion, had tears in her eyes. 16 hours, Hyundai said. We just have to survive 16 hours. It sounded simple. It was not. Lord Vorn received 2 pieces of news within the same hour. First, his scouts had finally located the human resistance fighters. They were trapped in a series of caves on the eastern slopes, with nowhere left to run. Second, a massive human fleet had appeared at the edge of the system and was approaching fast. He stared at the tactical display. Processing both facts. The human reinforcements would arrive in less than a day. His own reinforcements were still 2 days away. If the human fleet reached the planet first, his invasion would fail. 37 conquered worlds, and he would be remembered as the commander who lost to humans, unless he won first. All forces, Vorn ordered, his voice cold with determination, converge on the human position. I want those soldiers dead before their fleet arrives. Every last one of them. The final battle began at dawn. They came from every direction. Thousands of Helix soldiers supported by armored vehicles and aircraft. The mountain shook with explosions. The sky turned black with smoke. And in the middle of it all, 8 humans fought like they had nothing left to lose. Because they did not. Day used his last explosives to collapse a cliff face onto an advancing column. Yuna shot down a scout aircraft with a rifle meant for infantry, a shot that would be talked about for generations. Bora killed 6 soldiers who tried to flank their position. Her medical kit abandoned for a weapon she had never wanted to carry, and Kong stood at the center of it all, directing fire, calling movements, refusing to let his squad break. The enemy threw wave after wave at their position, and each wave broke against their defense. The ground was covered with alien bodies. The air smelled of blood and burning, but they were running out of ammunition. Running out of time. By midday, 3 more soldiers had fallen. Hyundai was hit in the shoulder, but kept fighting with one arm. Bora had a wound across her forehead that bled into her eyes. Only 5 were still standing, and the enemy was closing in. Kong fired his last magazine and threw his rifle aside. He drew his pistol, 8 bullets remaining. Around him, his squad did the same. This was the end. Then the sky split open. Human dropships screamed through the atmosphere, dozens of them, hundreds of them, falling like rain. The 3rd Fleet had arrived early, pushing their engines beyond safe limits. And they had not come to negotiate. The first wave of human soldiers hit the ground firing. Fresh troops, rested and angry, cutting through the exhausted Helix forces like a blade through paper. Aircraft filled the sky, turning alien vehicles into burning wreckage. The mountain that had been a battlefield became a slaughter. Kong watched it happen. Through eyes blurred with exhaustion and tears, they had made it. Against everything, they had made it. He fell to his knees as human soldiers surrounded his position, calling for medics, shouting in voices he could barely understand. Someone was saying his name. Someone was saying they were safe. What a strange word. He had forgotten what it meant. The battle for New Busan lasted 3 more days. What had been a simple invasion became a disaster for the Helix Dominion. Their 40,000 soldiers, already exhausted and demoralized from 2 weeks of fighting ghosts in the mountains, broke against the fresh human forces. Their fleet, caught unprepared by the size of the human response, was destroyed in orbit within hours. Lord Vorn refused to surrender. Even as his army crumbled around him, even as his officers begged him to negotiate, he remained in his command center. Watching the tactical display turn red with defeat, he could not understand what had happened. He had brought enough soldiers to conquer 100 human colonies. He had followed every protocol, every strategy that had worked on 37 other worlds. But humans were different. He understood that now, too late. On the final day, human soldiers stormed his command center. Vorn met them with a plasma pistol in his hand, determined to die fighting. But they did not kill him. They shot the weapon from his grip, forced him to the ground, and bound his arms behind his back. "Why?" he demanded, his voice broken. "Why did you not die? Why did you not surrender? You were 12 soldiers against an army. You should have been crushed in a single day." The human officer who stood over him was a young woman with hard eyes and blood on her uniform. She looked at him for a long moment before answering. "Because we are human," she said simply. "We do not know how to quit." They took him away in chains. He would spend the rest of his life in a human prison, a living example of what happened to those who underestimated humanity. But worse than the prison, worse than the shame, was the knowledge that would follow him to his grave. He had been defeated by 12 soldiers, not an army, not a special forces unit. 12 ordinary reconnaissance soldiers who simply refused to break. The surviving members of Reconnaissance Unit. 7 woke up in a military hospital ship orbiting the planet. Kong Tae opened his eyes to white walls and soft beeping sounds. His body ached in places he did not know existed. His hands were wrapped in bandages, his chest covered in sensors. For a long moment, he simply lay there, letting himself breathe. A doctor appeared beside his bed. "Sergeant Kong, you are awake." "Good. You have been asleep for 2 days, my squad," Kong said, his voice rough. "The others. Are they alive?" "All of them. Private Han Dae lost the use of his right arm, but he is stable. Corporal Yuna suffered a concussion and several broken ribs. Private Bora has minor injuries only." The doctor smiled gently. "You held them together, Sergeant. They tell me you saved them." Kong shook his head weakly. "They saved themselves. I just pointed them in the right direction." Over the following days, the full story emerged. News reporters arrived from Earth, from colony worlds across human space, all wanting to hear about the 12 soldiers who had held off an alien invasion. The story spread across the galaxy like wildfire. 12 humans. 2 weeks. Over 1,500 enemy soldiers killed. An entire invasion force stopped in its tracks by a reconnaissance unit that was never meant to fight. Military analysts studied their tactics for years afterward, how they used terrain, how they spread fear, how they turned their weakness into a weapon. The Battle of New Busan became required study in every military academy in human space. But for Kong, none of that mattered. What mattered was the 5 names carved into the memorial stone they built on the mountain where they had fought. Private June, Private Kwan, Private Sung, Private Myra, who had survived her wounds but would never walk normally again. Private Kim, who had died in the final assault, holding a choke point alone for 3 minutes so the others could retreat. 5 soldiers who would never go home. 5 friends who had given everything. The ceremony was held on a cloudy afternoon, 1 month after the battle ended. Kong stood with his surviving squad. all of them in dress uniforms for the first time since they had landed on New Busan. Yuna's arm was still in a sling. Handai's right sleeve was pinned empty at his side. Bora had a scar across her forehead that would never fade, but they stood straight and tall as Admiral Park placed medals around their necks. The Medal of Extraordinary Valor, the highest honor the military could give. They had earned it 10 times over. After the ceremony, Kong found himself alone at the memorial stone. The clouds had cleared, and late afternoon sunlight painted the mountains gold. From here, he could see the city below, already rebuilding. Life continuing. That was what they had fought for, he supposed. Not glory, not medals. Just the chance for ordinary people to live ordinary lives. He turned to find Bora standing behind him. She looked different now than she had in the mountains. Softer somehow, less haunted. The killing was behind her, and she could finally breathe again. Just Tay, he said. We are not in the field anymore. She nodded and came to stand beside him. For a while, neither spoke. They did not need to. They had spent 2 weeks together in the worst conditions imaginable. Words were unnecessary between them now. What will you do? Bora finally asked. After all this? Kang thought about it. The military had offered him a promotion, a position training other soldiers in the tactics they had used. He could become an instructor, passing on what they had learned to the next generation. It was a good offer. An honorable way to continue serving, but he was tired. So very tired. I think I want to go home, he said quietly. See my parents. Maybe sit by a river and do nothing for a while. Bora smiled. That sounds nice. What about you? She looked down at the city. There are wounded people down there. Civilians hurt during the occupation. They need doctors. She paused. I think I am done fighting. I want to heal again. Kong understood. Everyone dealt with war differently. Some needed to continue. Others needed to stop. Neither choice was wrong. A year later, a Helix historian published a document that spread across every civilized world in the galaxy. It was meant as a warning to other species who might consider attacking humanity. The document read, "We believed humans were soft. We had studied their art, their music, their literature. We saw a species that valued peace and beauty and comfort. We thought this made them weak. We were wrong. Humans are not weak. They are simply patient. They build gardens instead of fortresses because they do not fear war. They do not fear war because they know, deep in their bones, that they will win it. Not through numbers. Not through technology. Through something we do not have a word for in our language. The closest translation might be stubbornness, or perhaps insanity. Humans will fight when fighting makes no sense. They will die before they surrender. They will hold impossible positions against impossible odds, not because they believe they will survive, but because surrender is simply not something they do. The Dominion sent an army to conquer a single world. We were stopped by 12 soldiers who did not know how to quit. 12 soldiers who became nightmares in the darkness. 12 soldiers who proved that numbers mean nothing against a species that refuses to break. Let this be a warning to all who would threaten humanity. They are not prey. They are not weak. They are something far more dangerous. They are survivors, and they will endure.